Now that we've talked about the idea of variables and understand that a variable is just a container, think of it as a box in your house which you can contain your shoes, your clothes, whatever you put in there. Let's now talk about the things that we contain in variables. Those are the data itself. For example, we had age. Previously, age is actually representing the age of a person, which is a number. That number has no decimal, because obviously age, you don't ever hear someone really saying I'm 2.7 years old. It's always either I'm 2 or I'm 3, I'm 4, and so forth, which then makes us know that we are dealing with integers. So integers are all whole numbers, positive or negative, such as 42 minus 7, 0. All these are integers. So here we're going to look at the four main types of data types, the first one being integers. Integers are the simplest to understand because they are always they don't have commas separating the values. After the idea of integers, we also have the idea of what we call a float. A float is a decimal number, such as pi, or 3,14, or minus 0,5, or 100,0. Once there is a comma, we then call it a float. There's also str. Str is text in quotes. We've already dealt with this when we're saying hello world. So hello in quotes is a text. Also, we can either use single quotes like so, or double quotes like so. Single or double quotes both work. But you need to be consistent. Don't open with single and close with double, Then we also can use Boolean or bool. Bool can only have two values. We already saw that, true or false. They should have a capital first letter. Other programming languages want them to be small letters, so that's why it's important for you to obey the rules. We are learning Python, so if you have some history with another programming language, don't come here and then ask us why it's supposed to be capital here when you're used to small letter. It's a different language. When you go to Rome, do as the Romans do. Then you can then use a function. It's called a function. Type and brackets. You always recognize what we call functions by the fact that there will be open and close bracket in front of the name. We'll come back to the idea of functions later, but just know that it's a function that is able to see what type any value is. So when you then say type and put the variable in there, just like over here, so we introduced our variables here in my underscore int, remember no spaces allowed, and always small letters. So my underscore int receives the value 42, my underscore float receives the value of 3.14, my underscore string receives the value of hello, my underscore bool receives the value true. We did talk a little bit about all these ideas, especially about quotes. Once you leave out the quotes, it will get confused. Once you also put quotes on true, it will then treat true as a string type, which will then change the rest of the logic that you'll be trying to work on. So please keep this in mind and pause if you need to pause so that you can internalize this, experiment with it, and then see what gives. Now that we've declared our different variables here, the main four types, int, float, string, and bool, we can then check their types over here. Now, the names that we give to our variables should always be intuitive. By that we mean we should give a name that gives you an idea of what this variable represents. If it's a variable representing age, you could, without a problem, name it A. You could name it G. You could name it age. That then gives you the idea of what it's representing. So always remember to use names that make you remember what that variable actually is trying to do. That's why we actually call them my int here. You could have just said my I, my F, my S, my bool. Whatever you want, it will still be able to work. Now, as you then say print type my int, it is then able to tell you what this value is. Is it an integer? Is it a float? Is it a string? Whatever it is, it will then be able to type out class int. That actually is verifying for you that this is an integer, and so forth. We'll experiment with this in a moment. Now, Now that we have talked about bool and we've talked about the function type, Python automatically chooses the type. So this is very important, especially if you are coming from another different programming language. Programming languages like Java will need you to tell Java what type of variable age is. Python then defends itself to say that should be obvious. That's why we don't need our programmers to say so. While Java programmers will say it's important to be explicit about your data types because it can affect the smooth running of the programs as we go. It's two different schools of thought. You pick one and stay with it. All right. So since Python automatically chooses the type for you, it means mixing types without converting them causes errors. We will then come back to this later. There are certain things that you can do. For example, addition. So you can say 42 plus 7, and that then gives you 49. Things can then get tricky when you say 42 plus hello, because those are two different data types. That's what we mean by mixing data types without converting them causes errors. We'll come to that. All right. Now, let's quickly get this code in our Colab and see what makes it tick. So I'll come to my Colab. I'll minimize what I can minimize. Last time I could minimize even this part, but it's fine. I can just scroll down a little bit and add new code. As I told you, I'll pause a bit as I type this out so that I don't waste your time. I'm sure you have also typed it out. Please type, don't copy and paste. Now, the first line is a comment, just to tell us what the following code will do. Comments are very important. So my int is 42, my float is 3.14, my string is hello, my bool is true. We can then check the type by using the type function and say print type my int. It will then be able to print out class int. By saying class int, it's just meaning this value belongs to a class of integers. It's an integer. That's literally what it's saying there. It's just saying this value is an integer. And the rest, float, string, bool. Then you can also check on a value directly. You can also just say print type and put the value directly. It will tell you this is a float because there's a comma. And once you say print high, type high in quotes, it will tell you this is a string. Once we play that, it's able then to give us the feedback that we expected. So this line is corresponding to this response. Now, we could make things get interesting. What if I put a dot between 4 and 2? Always experiment with code. Don't just take it as it is. Ask yourself, what happens if I change? Now, remember, the first line will be the output we get. So it then says class float. It means in as much as I still named it my int, the fact that I've put a comma, it's no longer an int. Python won't actually be able to tell that you named it my int, therefore it should be an integer. To Python, this is just a name that you gave. What it represents is up to you. So it will just tell you the truth. Now my int is actually a float. It's no longer an int. Its name doesn't really matter to Python as much. Or correct it back. Whenever you do any changes, always correct things back so that it doesn't confuse you later on. Now, when I correct it back, it now comes back to being an integer. I could also make things a little bit more interesting by trying to put a comma, as in a real comma. Once I do so, it then tells me this is now a tuple. This is another type of variables that we'll look at in the future. But this is not really 4,2 in the sense of 4,2. This is literally now a list of numbers 4 and 2. So please be careful. Dot is the sign of decimal point in Python. You can't use them interchangeably. I could also then come over here and change this to double quotes. Remember, I did tell you can't start with this one quote and end with a double quote. It will tell you there's something wrong on my string on hello there. Take a look on line 4, and when you go back to line 4, you'll be able then to see, oh, I had mixed different types of quotes. Once you put the correct quotes, it will be it will come back like that. I'll mostly use single quotes because they don't require me to press additional buttons like shift, but you do you. I hope you have understood the idea of variable of data types. Now we'll go to the next one. You can pause at any moment to really get to understand what's happening, and before you move on to the next thing, as long as you understand, that's all that matters.